President Obama nominates a well-respected centrist to replace conservative Antonin Scalia on the Supreme Court, putting Republicans in a bind. Democrats are getting most of the action in the San Diego City Attorney's race, and endorsements loom large. And how are big North County developers reacting to the rejection by Carlsbad voters of a high-end mall near a popular lagoon? I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Greg Moran, investigative and legal affairs reporter for the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Mark. How are you doing?
Good to see you back here again today. Reporter Andrew Keats of Voice of San Diego. Hi, Andy.
How are we doing, Mark?
Glad you're here today. And KPBS North County reporter Allison St. John. Hi, Allison.
Hello, Mark.
We're glad to have you today. Well, some are calling it President Obama's Godfather move. He's making Senate Republicans an offer they can't refuse, yet they still might. Despite GOP's leaders' insistence they won't even hold a confirmation hearing, the president this week nominated a well-respected moderate federal judge to the Supreme Court. Greg, start with a profile here of Merrick Garland. First of all, he's got odd two names
he
to
does.
start with.
One of those guys with two last names, yeah.
Yeah, it's like Anne Margaret. Shouldn't do that to us.
But he is described widely as sort of a judge's judge. This is a guy who spent, obviously, his life, his career in the law, spent a lot of time on the federal court bench for what is probably the second most powerful court in the country, the court for the D.C. Circuit, which hears a lot of cases that arise from congressional legislation. Before that, he was a federal prosecutor, had worked very famously on both the Unabomber case and the Oklahoma City bombing case. Graduate of Harvard Law, but really his most salient attributes seem to be a very amicable guy, very intelligent, and a person that appears to be without any real explicit ideology. That's why people call him a judge's judge, is that he takes one case at a time and looks at it and
applies the law,
applies the case, and moves on to the next one without any clear ideological agenda.
And he's 63, a little older. Normally you see late 40s, early 50s,
yeah.
so presidents can have their nominees serve a long time. Not this fellow.
Not with him, but he's apparently there's some pretty good longevity on his family side. But even if not, I mean, you're looking at these days it's a 10 or 15-year run. I mean, you don't. No man knows the hour, as the good book says,
right.
but
But many years in any case,
sure.
Even at this. So when the court's conservative icon, Antonin Scalia, as we said at the opening, he died last month, Republicans like Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, they immediately said they're not even, don't even send a nominee, we're not going to talk to him, we're not even going to have a hearing. Why?
Well, politics, elections, and ideology mostly. I mean, this was the Republicans are in a difficult position here in some ways. They understand that the death of Scalia really has long-term ramifications for the court. It's going to change. Even Garland, if he were ever to be confirmed, is a moderate. I mean, the gravitational pull of Antonin Scalia intellectually on that court was so large, it pulled it, really anchored the right, that any Obama or Democratic presidential nominee, no matter how moderate, is going to move it certainly closer to the center and on some issues to the left of the center. And so they're concerned about that for the long term and the long-term legacy of the court. They also have to worry about the short-term concerns of the upcoming election, the antipathy among their base towards anything that President Obama does, and the sense that that they want to kind of kill this baby in the crib before it even gets going.
And I want to throw it out to Andy and Allison. So some of the Republicans we've all read this week have said we want the American people to weigh in and have a voice. Well, the retort from Obama and the Democrats is, well, they did weigh in 2012. And if that's the case, what about the voters who voted for Obama, knowing that you have elderly folks on the court? He may well have one or more nominees. Don't they have a voice? I mean, is this fair to the folks who voted then?
What's interesting to me is the fact that some of the Republicans are saying that they might be willing to confirm him in a lame duck session. But I'm looking at, well, what are the odds? If you get Clinton, perhaps they would decide, okay, well, we might as well confirm him because he's likely to be the same guy. If it's Trump, you'd have thought if you were a Republican, you might think, well, who knows who he might. It would be safer just to go ahead and confirm this guy.
Yeah.
Or Clinton could nominate somebody far more liberal.
Far more liberal, you can't tell. And I think it's important to note that what's really interesting to me about this is that they're not just saying no, don't even nominate him, but they're saying like not even no hearing. No
don't
vote,
even come by and shake our hand and have a meeting.
And not even the long-standing common courtesy of, we've all seen it, of the nominee going to the offices of each of the members of the Senate Judiciary meeting for a handshake. Not even doing that. It's really,
and I don't quite understand the strategy behind it. I mean, far be it of me to question Mitch McConnell. He, for whatever you think of him, has played the internal politics of Congress brilliantly for the last 7 years.
Yeah, he's still there.
And yet I don't actually understand the wisdom of saying ahead of time, don't bother with anyone, where you put yourself in this position where you have to discuss, well, didn't the voters elect somebody for 4 years? It would seem so much easier to have just said, yeah, I mean, you're the president, submit somebody, and then no matter who they submit, say, yeah, this guy's unqualified. And while you might say, well, how are they going to make that case with Garland? They're skilled rhetoricians. They'd be able to find a way to describe anybody as unreasonable or.
But then they have to sell that on national TV in a series of hearings.
But isn't that an easier sell than?
That's a good
you
question.
Don't deserve. You don't have the full weight of the job that you are elected to do.
Which seems unfair to begin with.
Yeah.
But I think that's the thinking behind that. Not even the courtesy, not even a meeting, is that it's just sort of cut the oxygen off in this story before it even gets going, so we don't even have that.
Get to that.
And they're trying to make the point that it's not personal, and I think they'd have a hard time coming up with good reasons why Merrick Garland would not make a good candidate. Right. So if they went ahead with the hearings, then they'd probably have to make it personal.
And that's a lovely segue, Allison, into a couple of bites we have. Let's hear from a Republican senator, a staunch conservative, Orrin Hatch, what he said about Mr. Garland back then when they confirmed him on the lower court, and let's hear what he says now.
And he belongs on the court. And I believe that he is not only a fine nominee, but as good as Republicans can expect from this administration. In fact, I would place him at the top of the list.
I think people ought to start accepting that the Republicans are not going to do this at this time in this presidential election, but there will come a time when it will have to be done regardless of who is president. And yes, to answer your question, yeah, I would prefer having a Republican president because I think you'll get better judges.
All right, a Republican president. We get the celebrity Donald Trump. Maybe we get Diana Ross, another celebrity, to go with the Supremes. Who knows? So that seems to me to be just the opposite sides of it.
Hatch is now saying, well, I said it back then, I said it was fine for the court. I meant the appeals court, not the Supreme Court. It's kind of a distinction without a difference in some ways. But it does show that the problem that they're having, that it's...
Well, we do have another bite from the Democratic side, Senator Al Franken, who's on the Judiciary Committee.
I think the president made a wise pick. The White House reached out to Democrats on the Judiciary Committee, asked us what kind of nominee we'd like to see. I said, I want somebody who at the end of the hearings, the American people will say, I want 9 of those to be the Supreme Court. That's what I would like. I would like 9 of those. And it seems to me, from everything I know, and I've heard about Judge Garland, that you'd want 9 of those.
All right, and that kind of gets to your point, Andy, where, and what Greg was saying, the Republicans want to get into hearings because then the American people say, hey, maybe we want 9 of those.
Yeah, and then there's also this idea of whether President Obama was himself acting strategically and kind of pulling a rope-a-dope, so to speak, where you put forward this very moderate, very reasonable judge, call the bluff of the party, and then if they do shut you down, well, you've maintained the opportunity for your successor to appoint someone like Sri Srinivasan or something who's younger and maybe is a little bit more liberal.
Right.
Now, I don't know if it's so tactical. That certainly might have been a consideration. But in many ways, you look at Garland, he is he's somebody that you think Obama would be very comfortable with. He is a moderate. He is, deferential essentially to agency power and executive power in his rulings, and is, to the right of center and deferential to prosecutorial power and policing power, which is kind of the template for Democratic politicians in the last 30 years, nominating.
It is interestingly, though, a change in the Democratic Party going on right now with its relationship to law enforcement and prosecutorial power. With things like the Black Lives Matter movement. So that's one thing I thought was pretty interesting.
And even Republicans are talking about reform.
And that wave really hasn't crested yet and broken, so this is probably the last one that you'll see like this.
I was just going to say, we've got a little time left. One quick last question on this topic before we move on. What do polls say about the Republicans not even having a hearing on this. I think there's been some.
There has, you know, I think the Journal one showed us close to 60%.
Well, I wrote that down here. That is close to 55%, 57 to 25 of independents say you ought to have a hearing. You guys are wrong.
And I think that's the real problem the Republicans are going to face, is that's the voters that they need to save their seats and to win the presidential primary are independents, non-ideological people who just want to see do your job.
In a sense of fairness.
And they're tending to alienate those people.
All right, well, we'll watch and see. There are going to be plenty more on this story as we go on. We're going to move on now. It remains to be seen whether the race for mayor of San Diego will have much drama, but the fur is already flying in the battle to replace termed-out San Diego City Attorney Jan Goldsmith. All the drama's on the crowded Democratic side of the fence. Just one Republican is running. So, Andy, first explain how this race works. Could somebody win the whole thing in June in the primary?
Well, it is technically a possibility. If you get over 50%, you could win. I've never talked to anyone who thinks that's going to happen in this case. It's a very crowded field, and many of the candidates are very qualified. So I think you'll see the vote total split up pretty considerably, and no one will reach that 50% threshold.
All right, well, let's start in with a brief thumbnail here, description of the four Democrats. Start with Gil Cabrera.
So Gil Cabrera used to be the chairman of the Ethics Commission in San Diego. He's a respected lawyer. He's the type of guy who gets along with a lot of people in the downtown echo chamber. He's a qualified attorney by most standards, and the type of guy. He's a Democrat, and he's pretty popular.
And then we also have a Port Commission board member, another attorney.
Port Commissioner Rafael Castellanos. He was appointed in 2013, and really started making a name for himself. He was a major fundraiser for David Alvarez, and in the time that he has been on the Port Commission, he has really gone out of his way to introduce himself to a lot of different groups and to start making connections in preparations for this race. And he's come across as very formidable. He's raising a lot of money. He's collecting a lot of endorsements.
All right, and Mara Elliott, who might have an advantage on a ballot since she already works there, right?
Yeah, she's the chief deputy city attorney. She works in the office in a race where people don't really understand often what the job is.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a moment.
Or who their qualifications are. She's going to be the only one who right under her name says city attorney. And, once again, another very qualified Democratic challenger.
And then environmental attorney Brian Peace, who does have some name recognition.
Yeah, he has got some name recognition. In fact, he was just a major character in an episode of This American Life this week on the La Jolla Seals, where he has been an attorney who sued the city. He's had some other high-profile cases along those lines. He ran for District 1 in the city council 4 years ago. So his name's been out there. People know him. He's certainly the farthest left of the candidates.
Okay, and the lone Republican running is?
Lone Republican is a deputy district attorney. His name's Robert Hickey. He's the only Republican. He's got endorsements from the Lincoln Club and the Republican Party. He was got the endorsement of Mayor Kevin Faulconer, and so while a lot of things are going on on the left, the Republicans are more or less coalesced behind him, and it seems people are pretty confident that he's going to be one of the two people to advance to November.
Okay. Now, Greg, you've covered legal affairs in the city for a long time. Very important position, the city attorney, or does it matter who is? As recent years, Goldsmith's been in the news a lot.
It is, and before him, Mike Aguirre was a lot, and before him, Casey Gwinn was a lot. Before that, John Witt was sort of the classic mold of the city attorney, kind of the protect the fisc, the treasury, take care of the potholes, things like that. It's become a little bit more activist and high profile, mostly because of Mike Aguirre and the work that Goldsmith has done. Okay. So I don't, it's an important position. You have both criminal responsibilities within the city, prosecuting misdemeanors, and then the civil side of defending the city.
I mean, the city is supposed to be non-partisan, all these elections, but that's just theory. But I wonder whether the party is really the issue, because, with Aguirre 10 years ago, there was a pitched battle between him and the mayor. I mean, he was literally not representing the city. He was representing what he thought the city should be doing.
Or the people, as it were.
It kind of
recrafted the whole job. Yeah.
So, from Faulconer's perspective, I guess he's looking for somebody who he can work with, who will sort of not ruffle the waters too much. And I don't know whether it's to do with being Republican or Democrat, or whether it's to do with being part of the echo chamber, as you put it. Mm-hmm. What do you think the issues are that the average voter should be thinking about when deciding between these candidates?
Well, I think, Parties matter. Parties simply matter in politics.
Even if it's nominally nonpartisan.
Even if it's nominally nonpartisan. And I think you can rest relatively assured that the people will be stewards of what their party's interests are. I think there will be some differences between them, but I think there's good reason to believe when they that the people who support them and the people who endorse them are people with whom they share a set of values, and that they'll kind of work that way. I think Rafael Castellanos has labor is notably absent, and the
usually a big constituency for the Democrats.
It's a major constituency in anything the city does, and so to say who would be more labor-friendly or less labor-friendly is going to be a difficult thing right now, because even Robert Hickey is a union member who has an endorsement from his union, the Deputy District Attorneys Association, but the Labor Council, the kind of the labor union of labor unions in town, has said that they're basically going to sit it out until June.
Big Democratic group in town. June. Well, let's talk about endorsements a little bit. Your story focused on that and why they, along with money, why they could be very important in a race like this.
Right, and once again, it basically comes down to money. But on the Democratic side, if that party chose to endorse one of the qualified candidates, they would have the opportunity to spend money that is, from on an individual contribution level above what can be given to a candidate, and then they can use that money to communicate with their members. So that means emails, that means mailers, that means get out the vote efforts, going door to door, those sorts of campaigns, and it absolutely matters significantly. And in a race like this, where people aren't going to have a great deal of information about every candidate, having that sort of network on your side can push you over the edge.
And the whole deal, as we said, is being among those two that get on to November in the big election. It could be two Democrats, right, with 4 out of 5 running?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I think the Republicans in Hickey's campaign aren't taking anything for granted. There's absolutely no case that they're going to say that they're going to feel so confident that they're going to move ahead. And I think what they've told me so far that they have no intention to do this, but one thing to look for is whether they in fact actually start involving themselves in the Democratic side and kind of supporting either with attack ads against one candidate or attack ads against another, start to try to think which is the guy we'd like most to face off against, which was a strategy famously that the Republicans in town did in 2012 when they cratered Nathan Fletcher's campaign
David Alvarez.
Because they felt like they had a much better opportunity if they went head-to-head against Bob Filner.
And guess what? It worked. All right, well, we'll be watching that as we move along. It's going to be a fascinating race as we move into that primary. So the voters of Carlsbad have spoken, but it may not be that everyone is listening. The proposed development of a lagoon-front property was recently shot down by Carlsbad voters who rejected Measure A. Yet backers of another big controversial development are trying the ballot route anyway, even as a different North County proposal goes down a different path. Allison, start sorting all this out by first explaining what happened there in Carlsbad.
Well, in Carlsbad, we saw, the developer spending $10 million on his hopes to build a high-end open-air shopping mall on the lagoon, and there was a referendum to overturn the city council's approval of it, and in the end, that faction of the city that was opposed to it won, And this, I think, has made a lot of developers around town sort of sit up and pay notice, because the thing is, this is a relatively new process. Up until now, developers have had to go through the California Environmental Quality Act review, which is very long,
the big
expensive.
environmental review, yeah.
And then the Supreme Court, just in 2014, said, okay, you can just go to the initiative process, and if the people say that they want it, that'll bypass the whole thing. So people thought it was going to be an easier method to get their developments approved, but CEQA remains the sort of the base standard for going through. And I decided to look at two developers who are looking at big master plan communities up 15, Lilac Hills Ranch, and which is near Valley Center, and Newland Sierra, which is a little further south, closer to San Marcos and Vista and Escondido, up 15. And they are taking sort of different routes. The one for Lilac Hills has faced some problems, because we may remember they've gone through CEQA, actually. They've gone through the whole process a couple of times, but they needed to get a vote on the supervisors. They needed to get a 3-2 vote in the Board of Supervisors, and when Bill Horn was advised not to vote for conflict of interest reasons, they no longer had a definite vote. They couldn't be sure they would win. So they are taking a safe route and taking a dual route, they're also going to try the initiative process. And what's interesting is that it'll be very different from Carlsbad. It's really a whole different story because it's the whole county. So, you know, it's not going to be very easy for somebody, if they don't like the decision, to say, well, we're going to mount a referendum and overturn it, because it would be quite a big undertaking, very expensive, and I just can't imagine the opponents would have the resources. In Carlsbad, it was, you know, a little local community, and they were able to mobilize people in a short amount of time and overturn it. But it's a savvy move on the part of the developer, because it would be much harder to overturn.
And another thing is often when it goes through the CEQA process and when it ultimately gets an approval, any project, and this was certainly the case for Lilac Hills, often it comes with a series of conditions for the approval. In the case of Lilac Hills, there were a number of different things that were going to be that were going to be stipulated by the Board of Supervisors. We don't know what the Board of Supervisors was going to do, but the Planning Commission had stipulated a number of things that they had recommended the Board of Supervisors to stipulate as well. And those things will not be required anymore. So the Lilac Hills Ranch could, in fact, be in a position where, by going to the referendum, they have to provide even less for the community that immediately surrounds the project.
And the chances of people really understanding that when they sign a signature, you know, my fear is that the signature gatherers are out there right now saying, well, just sign here and you'll get to vote on it. Or, I mean, that could be what they're saying, but the Board of
tends to empower people. Yeah, you get a voice in this.
Yeah, but it could happen exactly the same way as happened in Carlsbad, that the Board of Supervisors decides, well, we think we'll just approve it anyway. So,
well, is the thinking that Carlsbad was like an outlier? I mean, I'm really interested. I mean, there's $10 million the developer spent. The other people put in for like $100 or something. I mean, they were wildly outspent, and they lost. Is there something unique to that? Is that a blueprint for other people, you know, who are trying to fight these kinds of projects? I mean, I understand the problems with Lilac Hills being a bigger.
I think there was a couple of messages from that. One was to the city council: look, don't just go ahead and say you're going to approve it, let the people vote. Because if they had let the people vote as the signature gatherers had told the people, there wouldn't have been that sense of outrage. And it might even have passed, you never know. Even although there was some opposition, that outrage, I think, was what sort of motivated everybody to say, no, we're going to vote against it. So I think that was one message.
It does seem to me that a big part of this is the how close the people voting are to the project itself.
Right.
In Carlsbad, everyone was in Carlsbad. And, you know, the Barrio Logan initiative a few years ago, this was a new land use plan that was intended to protect the health of Barrio Logan residents, and it was overturned by the shipyard industry put it on the ballot. And if you look at the precinct-by-precinct results in that vote, the people who lived in and around Barrio Logan wanted the plan. And it was the entire rest of the city who, you know, maybe hasn't been to Barrio Logan in a very long time, certainly doesn't live there, that voted the other way and was much more receptive to the messaging, which was this is bad for jobs in San Diego. This is bad for San Diego's economy. And I think you're going to be able to see Lilac Hills make a very similar case. And, you know, a Chula Vista resident isn't going to have to deal with whatever negative outcomes there are from the project, but they will still hear the same message that housing is too expensive in San Diego, and this is one way to deal with it.
Right. Let's talk for a minute about the other big project we're talking about, which is Newland Sierra, and also the how both of these are kind of running afoul of the county plan, general plan.
Well, yeah, both of them are in the same situation in that they're building hundreds of homes more than the county general plan that was only passed 4 or 5 years ago would have allowed. In the case of Lilac Hills, you know, it was supposed to be 110 homes, and in fact, they're proposing 1,700. In the case of Newland Sierra, I believe.
110, 1,700.
What's the difference?
What's the difference?
You know, huge for the people around there. And the infrastructure is just not there to support it. You know, in the case of Newland Sierra, it was probably around 7,500, and they're proposing 2,100, I believe. Wow. So, you know, it would require a big amendment to the general plan. So they both have this same hurdle to leap to convince the supervisors or the voters that, look, it's worth amending the general plan. And what's so interesting to me is that the general plan was the result of 10 years of democracy, endless local community planning meetings. I mean, I sat through many of them. It was really a long and arduous process to get to what everybody was happy with, right? And
here's how we want to plan our community. Here's what we're going to do going forward. That's the whole idea.
And Newland Sierra is saying, you know, we're going to continue to go through that amendment process, and we're going to go through CEQA. We're not going to try with this initiative thing to just sort of slip by. And I do think the initiative is a little bit of, using democracy to defeat democracy, But
it's an interesting way to put it.
In terms of the signature gathering, people don't really think much when they're signing their name outside the grocery store about the issue. They might think, well, I'd like to see some more housing because we need more affordable housing.
Oh,
but
sure,
they
the
don't
people
realize,
should vote, yeah.
Yeah, the amount of thought that went into providing enough housing that went into the general plan, which did, according to San Diego Association of Governments, our regional planning agency, did provide enough places for housing.
All right, a few seconds left here before we have to say goodbye. Timetable on these two. When might decisions be made on all?
Well, they're collecting signatures now to try to get it on the ballot in November. Now, the thing is, of course, they'd have to go to the supervisors first, and there's always a chance the supervisors might say, yes, we approve it before then. And in the case of Newland Sierra, that probably will go before the Planning Commission this fall, and maybe the supervisors a little later.
So we'll be watching for your stories on all of that. All right, well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Greg Moran of the San Diego Union Tribune, Andrew Keats of Voice of San Diego, and Allison St. John of KPBS News. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.